네, 다들 즐거운 휴식 시간 보내셨습니까? 그럼 지금부터
Did you enjoy the coffee break? We will now resume the 2020 International Symposium on Sustainable Peace on the Korean Peninsula. We will go on to session 4. Session 4 title is K-Culture, Peace, and Korea's Image in the World. For our fourth session, Eunjin Bang, Festival Director of the PyeongChang International Peace Film Festival, will be moderating this session. Bang Eunjin is a celebrity and she is also a film director, and she is currently the first festival director of the PyeongChang International Peace Film Festival and Gangwon Film Commission. And she is contributing to the development of arts and culture in Korea. And as our panelist, we have Pierre-Olivier Francois, documentary film director, and we also have with us as a panelist film director Yang Seok and president of the Korea Culture and Tourism Institute Kim Dae-kwan. Hello everyone, I am Eunjin Park, a film director. It's session 4 and I think you might be a bit tired by now, so we will not have presentations, we will have a free discussion session. And I will be reading out a sentence. It was 1991. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was an end to the Cold War, yet Korea misses out on the opportunity to establish a peace regime, and the only place where there is a Cold War is on the Korean Peninsula. So do you recall where this statement comes out? It comes out in Steel Rain 2 that was introduced this year. And so it shows us our situation now and the identity of Korea. And so I wanted to start off with that quote. And so there was the June 15 North-South Joint Declaration, and it's already been 20 years since then. And I looked up in the dictionary the word peace. How is it defined in the Korean dictionary? So peace is a harmonious and tranquil situation. So we talked about peace on the Korean Peninsula, and it is because we are not living in harmony and we do not have stability on the Korean Peninsula. And I am here not as a film director, but because I am the festival director of the PyeongChang International Peace Film Festival. And so I think I need to talk a little bit about our PyeongChang International Peace Film Festival. So the PyeongChang International Film Festival is being held at PyeongChang, where we held the Winter Olympic Games. So we have many peace film festivals, but PyeongChang is an international peace film festival, and the first film festival was the Inter-Korean Film Festival. And despite the COVID-19 situation, we had an offline film festival at PyeongChang. And when we were preparing for the film festival, and I became the very first festival director, which means that I had to prepare for a year and a half for this film festival. And during that time, I would have to say that as a Korean, it gave me an opportunity to focus on the Korean Peninsula and why we are living in this way. And I realized as I was preparing for the film festival that I did not give a lot of thought to this before. And I had to study a lot about the state of the Korean Peninsula, and I had to meet officials from various ministries, and I had to think about what type of exchange we need with North Korea. And I have studied about this topic, and what I learned is that during the past 9 years there was a disconnection with North Korea, and therefore we have to resume and re-establish many ties that were severed. And at PyeongChang, we created this mode of reconciliation, and there was talk about having the end of the film festival at North Korea, and we began the film festival with human resources exchanges. But as you know, after the Inter-Korean Summit meeting, there was the fallout of the Hanoi Summit, and 2 months after that, we had the first film festival, and 2 days before the second film festival, there was the explosion of the liaison office, and yet we said that we should continue on and we should make preparations, and that is why and how we were able to continue on with the International Film Festival. And film festivals are not just about films, it is a cultural event, and Gangwon province has a unique character, and so I think it is a very meaningful film festival. And also, this year marks the 100th anniversary of film in Korea, and Berlin University and Kim Il-sung University, we have an MOU with them. And so we had a 100-year film anniversry forum held in Germany, and they did not give the United Front department person could not get a visa, and so I met, however, one person there, who is the director that's participating in today's event, Pierre-Olivier Francois, documentary film director. And the title of that film was Korea 100 Years of War. And so it's a 2-part documentary film, and the subtitling in English was being made, and so I asked if it could be participating in our film festival, and he was invited to our film festival. And during a special talk, he talked about filming in North Korea. So there was that special talk during the film festival, and the Iterik's film and the Korea 100 Years of War. In Korea, that film was also screened, and there was a special talk on filming in North Korea. Because they are not South Koreans, they could go to North Korea to film there. And so we have gathered together, and we see on the screen Pierre Francois. Are you at home?
Yes, hello. Hello from Paris.
Yes.
So it's 7 a.m. I understand, and so we have him as a panel. And for the other panelists, we have with us the film director, who is a film director of The Attorney in 2013. And today he's going to be talking about the Steel Rain 1 and 2 that deals with the inter-Korean relations that was on screen in 2017 and 2020. Hello, everyone. I'm Yang Woo-seok, film director. And we have with us as another panelist, president of the Korea Culture and Tourism Institute, So this institute studies the contents and culture of Korea. We have president of Korea Culture and Tourism Institute, Kim Dae-kwan, and he's going to be speaking about inter-Korean exchanges and policy implications and peace regime, and also how that determines the image of Korea.
네, 안녕하세요. 한국문화관광연구원
Hello everyone, I am
반갑습니다.
Dae-kwan Kim, president of the Korean Culture and Tourism Institute. So we have Pierre-Olivier Francois joining from France, and seeing him on the screen, it almost seems as if he is here in person. And so I would like to hand over the microphone to Pierre-Olivier Francois. And we had a lot of talks via short messaging, SNS, and emails. And Korea 100 Years of War was screened in Korea, but not many of you may have seen it. So we would like to show you a trailer of the movie. And there is also Have Fun in Pyongyang. So one is a trailer and one is a clip of the movie Have Fun in Pyongyang. So we will watch the videos first and then give the microphone over to director Francois.
Then it became the conflict in the framing of the Cold War between.
조선반도에서는 냉전이 지속됐거든.
But how do you tell the history of Korea when there are two of them? Felt they were regaining control of their destiny. In the years that followed, gaps appeared in the DMZ.
That none of those countries were really that interested in pushing unification too far.
Constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Rocket Man, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
그야말로 충격 그 자체였죠.
우리가 분명 당군의 편인 하나의 민족이다.
Not German, not Vietnamese, but Korean.
서서히 모든 것을 이룰서 나가야 한다고.
불안하다. 조금 떼라요. 다시 조금 떼고. 나 좀 불어요. 이렇게. 여거 사진 찍자. 웃으면서.
So far, we haven't witnessed a birth in North Korea, but many weddings, or rather their preparation. Here, a wedding video shot by a professional who's getting the happy couple to pose in all the iconic sites of their city. It's monsoon season, 38 degrees Celsius, and extremely humid.
신랑 신부들은 먼저 이렇게 새 가정을 이룰 때면 우리 수령님과 장군님, 우리 덩상을 먼저 찾습니다. 그리고 이런 하초공원이나 분수토, 말하자면 우리 자국을 지키는 인민군대들은 전순기념탑 같은 이런 기념비적 군상 같은 데를 찾습니다.
The tour always starts with the leaders' statues, even if they're shrouded in fog. After that, it's a la carte, art studio, Juche Tower, the mausoleum, local viewpoints. It ends in special banquet rooms, hired and decked out for the occasion. The size depends on the family's wealth. 80 to 120 guests, rocket-shaped bottles of alcohol, speeches and music.
네, 여기까지 보겠습니다.
The videos you watched are about the life of the North Korean people, and everything about North Korean people is about these people in power and the leaders in North Korea. And I was wondering what kind of wedding culture they have, so that's why I asked them to run this video. Francois, and why did you decide to concentrate effort on North Korea? Because the 100 years of war was very interesting and also very impacting on me. So why is that? Can you please explain your history of having to contact with North Korea and why you started that?
Yes, hello from Paris. I'm very honored to be with you. I'm very sad I can't be physically with you, but and I hope you still enjoy this meeting. So you saw two excerpts, and the first one is about Korea 100 Years of War, which is called, I think, 100 Years of Memory in Korean cinemas. And the idea was, I mean, why Korea? I'm not Korean. I don't speak Korean. But I got interested in it because I became 18 when the Berlin Wall fell. It was very important for me, for my generation, also because I'm half German. So I worked a lot about East Europe and about post-communism in East Europe. And in 2000, I was working as a TV journalist. I was asked to follow the follow-up of the Kim and Kim meeting in Seoul, and they said, well, it's probably some Asian form of communism interesting for you. And I came to Korea, and I discovered something much more interesting than just an Asian version of what we have. But it was a very own history, a civil war which starts very early in the 30s, Japanese colonization, Cold War, two-system ideology. And it was unknown in Europe. So I started to work on that. And it took quite a long time indeed to do this film, which is a long and film about 2 hours, about 100 years of conflict in Korea, where we wanted to interview all parts. And the most difficult was to convince the North Koreans to accept to do very long interviews, usually 1 or 2 hours, with high-ranking people from all sides. But the North Koreans were especially important for us because we wanted to have, I mean, it takes two to tango, and in Korea it takes even more to do war. So we had to have voices for that. And I told you I don't speak Korean, I'm not Korean, but I can go to both Koreas. So we spent a lot of time with the widow of Kim Dae-jung, with the former mayor of Seoul, with many diplomats, stakeholders, and this film came out. I'm very happy that it's now in Korean cinemas, because I think it was always in my mind, in my dream, that it could be shown here. It's your story, it's not mine. Although it was interesting for me, because one thing I also learned why Korea is interesting is that it's a perfect place to study propaganda. Of course, North Korean propaganda is very well known, it's very effective, but we all live in ideological mindsets, and for that, to work on this topic, it was helpful to understand in which world we live, also what we think, what is true, what is not true. So I'm happy that you mentioned that. And the second film is a sort of counterpart, which came after in 2015. Both films were long to make. Korea, 100 Years of War, maybe 10 years. Have Fun in Pyongyang, 5 years. But here we wanted only to have footage from North Korea that we shot. So it takes picture from different years, different trips, and it shows the other side. The first one is a very serious, heavy, historical, political film. The second one it's also political, but it says, what do North Koreans do when they don't parade? What do they do on Sunday? How do they marry? What do they eat? What do they do on holidays? So we called it Have Fun in Pyongyang. It was not always fun to make it, but I think the result is interesting, and it was premiered, this one, at the DMZ festival recently. It might come to Korean movie theaters. Both opened a lot of discussions, and I'm happy for that, because that's why I think documentary film is important. That you can start conversations, that you can ask new questions, that you can show things, and people take them and make something of their own. They reflect about it. So thank you very much for having me.
네.
Thank you very much. Other than documentaries, what is also on the other side is film, actual films. So with the films, we have somebody who has given us message of the very serious issues through the film. How much fiction has been added, and it's another thing, but Still Rain is the example of the filmmaking based off of this documentaries type. And Still Rain 2 is out, released this year as well. Mr. Yang, please, Director Yang. Would you like to say a few words? Well, for years, 1993 and 1994, I was witnessing the risk of the Korean Peninsula at the brink of a war. That became a shock to me personally. And after some time, we were more relieved by the fact that we didn't have to have a war. But the fact that we were just almost having a war was a great impact on me, leading me to make a web cartoon, and the filmmaking later on. So we do have the views on the North Korea, which have been changing over time. So I was wanting to describe it as well. So up until early 1990s, when we were finished with the Cold War, all the Korean people, the South Korean people, had the view onto the North Korea, and North Korea was an enemy country, and we had all the fury and fire onto the North Korean people at that time. However, Cold War era was over. And so did our views on the North Korea was changing. And then we had disillusionment and also hatred onto the North Korea that was coming along as well. The 1950s experienced war in this Korean peninsula. So the fury at that time in the 1950s had strong reason because we had our war that we were engaging in is only natural for us to hate our enemy, right? However, after the Cold War was over, we don't have any war, we don't have any enemy, but still we hate the other party. For example, if we have some place where we don't want to go, that's kind of mortuary or the toilets with other people. So we don't want to go there on a person to be happy, so because we feel unhappy there. But North Korea was like a kitschy place or the place for hatred for South Koreans so far because we didn't want to go there. We didn't want to see it that way. And especially young people, young generation in the South Korea had a very distorted view onto Korea, looking at it as something very negative. So maybe that's the reason why I made the film Still Rain. After the Cold War was over, after having the risk of getting into a war in the early 1990s, then some other people said that we had only 4 scenarios on the Korean Peninsula. So my film is about one of the 4 scenarios at that time. One part of the people said that we might have a war again. It can be a local war, it can be a global war. And in 1994, I told you that we almost had a war, right? And also in early 2000, we also had another risk of getting into a war. And then also the other one is that we saw the possibility of having the denuclearization of North Korea. And that was the second scenario. And 30 years ago, the think tanks of Korea said that it will be very promising for North Korea to do that, to have the denuclearization. But we saw some kind of seeds for the denuclearization in the meantime as well. The third scenario is the most popular one. That was the implosion of North Korea. That was viewed as the most possible one in 30 years ago. So we had a very dual position, whether North Korea will come to the negotiation table or will just will just explode in itself in the whole world. It will not be existing anymore. The fourth and the last scenario proposed by the think tanks in the world is that South Korea will not have any resort to it. So if North Korea is nuclearized, there's no way but to nuclearize again for South Korea as well. So if you have this enemy or counterpart who is nuclearized, you should also have nukes. So the fourth scenario is for South Korea to have nuclear facilities. India, Pakistan, and other countries were examples of having to arm themselves with nuclear weapons in order to tackle their neighbors. So The fourth scenario was the nuclearization of all the Korean Peninsula. So these four scenarios were the suggestions by the think tanks. I wanted to experiment my scenarios in the filmmaking. And then there's another very particular characteristics in the Korean Peninsula. One thing I regret a lot about South Korean history is that we had two cases of division or separation in one country in Europe. One was Germany, the other was Austria. They had the history of making divisions into the country. If we were not careful enough, Austria could have been our model to follow because Austria was called as a loser country at that time and was a victim country. We were in the same situation in the early 1900s after being liberated from Japan. After being liberated from Japan, we called ourselves a victim country, and we were just on the brink of being divided into by many other superpowers in the world. And then we had the Korean War. So if you look back, the history in the early 1900s or the 100 years so far, we believe that the influence on the superpowers were just present on the Korean Peninsula, both North and South Korea. North Korea was influenced by Russia and others, and also we had our history that was influenced by other superpowers. We had our Liberation Party leader called Kim Koo, and Mr. Kim Koo was also an example of the having to work for the liberation and independence of Korea. But he was assassinated. However, maybe because of the players of the superpowers and so on, so that was why we were not able to unite the country at that time. After the liberation was made from Japan, we always had the possibility of getting into a war. There was never a time that we were just totally free from the worry of a war. Back to Europe, Germany was different. Germany was able to get out of the division in the 1990s, and we wanted to think about the differences of the European countries and Korea. So that is the reason why I touched upon the issue or idea of the Steel Rain. I have to make a confession. I haven't watched the Steel Rain before, but before talking with you, that was recommended by you. Then I had the chance to watch it. And then I just had no Steel Rain too. And then recently I wanted to have a second watch of the Steel Rain 1. So I did that again. So Steel Rain 1 had a message that we will not go to ruins. We will be okay. We will be surviving. For example, that was about the state visit by Kim Jong-il at that time. There was a hope that we wished to have the visit from him. And also, that was the story of the session of the Steel Rain 2. And the Steel Rain 1 was kind of action-style movie to show the actual happenings in the history. For the viewers of Steel Rain 1 and Steel Rain 2, I don't want to judge the film by the number of turnout or the number of audience, but I also had the feeling that they had the scenes of the Chinese peddlers. They were just forced to come into the country, and then they were pushed away again. But we had to restore our sense of identification between North and South. And then later on, I was able to actually witness, in actuality, out of the film, about the summit meeting between the two leaders from both Koreas. But then this film seems to be very far from the reality. What do you think about that? What do you think the difference between film and the reality? Well, filmmaking takes a lot of time. Not for me, for example, it took 3 years to start the planning and then finish it off in the rehearsal. And then I thought that when I started working on the film, I thought after 3 years, by the time when I finished the film, probably there would be time for another war, because I was very certain that there might be a wars because we had the problems in relations with the U.S. and so on. And then I was able to see the Cuban Missile Crisis. And also the Cuban Missile Crisis was a kind of idea that I started with. And then the Still Rain one in the movie, that was actually a different setting, different scene. Korea, if Korea had the option or had the say in choosing our fortune, our destiny, what could happen? That's my question to start the film about. And when I started making Still Rain 2, was like several years ago, and I calculated it myself that it will be like in 2020 when we have a kind of summit meeting between North Korea and the U.S. And if there is a successful summit meeting between the two countries, Mr. Trump will be able to be re-elected. That was my calculation. And also, I thought that there is no way but to put a signature on this agreement between North Korea and the U.S. Never did I expect something like COVID-19 will just come into us. Without COVID-19, my theory would have been proven right. But actually, in reality, I was wrong because of the COVID-19. Then we don't have any agreement between the U.S. and the North Korea. And also, I wanted to show you the backstory of a kind of summit meeting because you don't know, nobody knows what's happening behind the scene when these two leaders are meeting. And also, we have TPP and the GPP as a trade partnerships. And in 2017, China was starting to get ahead of the U.S. So I thought also, again, in my calculation, I thought by 2020, we also have the trap of the Thucydides, and also Thucydides trap would be something that we have to avoid. So the challenger will rise to the power, surpassing the champion. So that I calculated that Thucydides trap will be available, will be made by the time 2020. Again, COVID-19 beat me, and I was not right because of COVID-19. So let's not talk about COVID-19 anymore because nobody beats COVID-19. That's just a fact for everybody. So now let's move on. If it is about documentaries about the factual things, and if there are the genre of movie as a documentary, and also on the other hand, we have the movies as a genre like Still Rain 1 and 2, whether you like it or not, in the sphere of culture. In where can we join together with our hearts together to get the emotion, to get the good impression. It's kind of signals that we want to get out of the films, watching films. No, of course, film is about amusement and fun, but on the other hand, films can be an opportunity for you to get a sense of life. Because also you are working for the public organization under the ministry. You must have had a lot of encounters with the people in the ministry and the government. So by ideology and by the state of the country, we are not communicating with North Korea now, so it seems very impossible to have the further discussions or amicable discussions with North Korea for the time being. But up until some time ago, we were preparing for a round of kind of festival with the North, but we cannot do it anymore. So in this juncture, what is your say to the situation?
So we are talking about peace on the peninsula, and our session deals with culture. And I'm grateful and I welcome this session. And that is because when we talk about peace on the peninsula, we talk about themes that are violent. Economy, politics, war, and weapons. But today we have this session under the theme of culture, and that is why I think it's quite meaningful that we have this session. And many people define culture in various ways, and personally, I feel that culture culture is about our existence itself. We are speaking about the Korean Peninsula in terms of space, but the content is about our people, and it's about two institutions of our different governments, and the time phase that we've been talking about a divided country is not that long. So we have a history of thousands of years, and we have a empathy and consensus among one another. So there's homogeneity between North and South, and it's been 70 years since our country has been divided, and there are subcultures from that has led to differences and heterogeneity. And in terms of history and time, it is not that long. But in these different regimes that we are living, we, I think, did not have enough effort to understand one another. And one way to understand one another better is through culture, and in particular through film. So why is this important then? Both of our panelists are film directors, so Mr. Francois and Mr. Yang spoke about this, mentioned this. I have seen many movies and dramas and films about North Korea. And when I see films and dramas about them, instead of trying to see conflict in that in the movies and films, we are emotionally touched. And when I saw the Steel Rain, I saw that North Korean children had opportunities to hear the music of Korean K-pop stars. And when we view North Korea, do we really understand them well enough? We realize that we actually don't know them that well. And the key of exchange is through culture and getting to know one another one by one. And there was another movie, and at the end, the top stars in North Korea and South Korea, they meet one another through an advertisement, and it touches me when I see this. And we are emotionally touched, and that is because we feel the similarities that we have with one another through culture. And there was this very short period of 70 years that we were divided. And throughout the history of the Korean Peninsula, 70 years is quite short, and yet we focus too much on the differences. And I think that language shows the power of culture. And Steel Rain and the Clash Landing of Love, that drama, we can understand one another because we share the same language. And North Koreans can view the films and understand that because we share the same language. I received training and education about anti-communism when I was very young, and I had some opportunities to meet North Koreans when I went abroad, but I did not have any problems in communicating with them because we share the same language and we have thousands of years of history with one another. And so there are differences, of course, that were created in the past 70 years. However, that difference and diversity is enough to be embraced. We have more similarities and things that we share, and we kept on thinking of our differences as something that needs to be overcome. But culture is not something that needs to be overcome. It's about embracing differences. And I think that in a comprehensive way, that's a key word. And that can be one way for us to go toward peace. And that is the right way for us to go toward peace. And that is why I believe that this discussion that we're having today is very important. And in the 1980s, we had a movement for unification. And as generations pass, we go through times of turbulence. And as a leader of the Korean Culture and Tourism Institution, and also as an individual, I think these discussions give us some hope. Francois, you're listening on, right?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with what you said.
네.
So Korea is a small country, and we do have some different dialects that we do use here in South Korea even, but basically we share the same language, and we can communicate with one another. And we have the One People Dictionary to share the languages of North and South, and there have been a lot of studies that are continuing on to understand one another. And Francois, have you been to Kesang?
Yes, several times.
So when you went to Kesang, was the Kesang Industrial Complex in operation when you went there?
It was the first time I was in Kesang, I think, was 2004. So I think it was still working, and then it was closed, but not completely closed. So there were ups and downs depending on the moments. And when you go to North Korea, it's very important to know what is the international context to also feel how the things are inside of the country. It's not completely related. Sometimes you have the feeling there's a big nuclear crisis outside with North Korea, and inside everything seems very peaceful. And what I have noticed that the last time I was in North Korea, which was summer 2018, I could do a lot of shooting which I never had dreamt of, because I think the situation internationally was much better. Trump being an unlikely person to change the politics between North Korea and the USA, it changed the mood. There was this incredible understanding between the Moon administration and North Korea also. And this helped me as a filmmaker to have a better access to things. It's also a long time process. You need to establish trust, especially in a country like North Korea, where it's still very difficult to make films. But I think this trust element is important on an international level and on the daily level. The two panelists have very rightly said how effective film can be to understand situations. And it can be with fiction film. I mean, the two films that you mentioned are very strong on that. I remember JSA being an eye-opener for me, also to understand that there are humans behind the uniforms, being South Koreans or North Koreans uniforms. And humans have understanding. North Korea documentary is similar. We work with reality, but it's also a very long process. But it can have an impact. When I was doing Korea 100 Years, we started in 2010, I didn't think it would be shown in Korea. It was mainly done for European television first. But it had a very lasting impact, because for Europeans and then for Americans and for Westerners, and then you told me for Koreans, it was an eye-opener to see that how the different stakeholders position themselves, how they argue, what they say, which memories they have, which souvenirs they have. And I think that's why I absolutely support cultural exchanges, film exchanges, documentary filmmaking. It's not always immediately rewarding. It doesn't have to be financially rewarding, but I think it creates a better understanding. It updates our prejudice. We all have prejudices about other countries. When we go there, we see that people are more complex, different, moving, or that they have wounds we have to take care of. We have to pay attention. We have to be sensible. So that's why I think that culture and films are so important. And maybe one last thing is to say, if we talk about North Koreans, I think many of them want these kind of exchanges. They are happy to be engaged in such exchanges. My experience filming in North Korea with North Koreans, what there were many who don't agree with all what I said. They don't agree with all positions, but they were happy that were interested in what they do, that we arrive with new ideas, with new concepts, with working methods, we start discussions with professionals. They make films, we make films. How do they do documentary? Very different from us. But at the end, it's the same language. So on that, you can build other stuff. You can build new cooperation. You can build longer relations. You can overcome a little the DMZ. Also the mental DMZ that we all have. We all have a bridge in the head, west, south, north. When you talk with, then you talk with professionals. So yes, do films, do support documentaries, do support cultural exchange.
Well, thank you very much. Director Francois told us that reminds us that he should be invited as a young director in Korea. So he should be working in Korea. Well, let's talk about the Kesang Industrial Complex. It has been serving both industries on the North and South Korea for longer than 7 years. The workers from both North and South Korea were mingling together and working together until one day they were closed. And then we also had Kumgang Mountain Special District, Special District Kumgang Mountain, and that was managed to be opened up. I was one of the tourists there at that time, but that was again closed. In the New Year's speech by Kim Jong-un said that at any rate, the special district of the tourism and the unconditional opening of these areas was mentioned. And also we had the headquarters of the campaign and movement to go back to the mountain Kumgang. More than 200 companies working in the Kesang Industrial Complex were evicted from the place without getting any scrap of their equipment there. So they just left everything in there. And also there was a time when the leader in the north said that they should be scrapped off and not living anything at all from the industrial complex. What kind of expectations can we have in there regarding the free trade and also free tourism between North and South Korea? Well, as a policymaker, I believe that one of the most important factors for culture is tourism. Tourism, when it is viewed as the normal people's life, it can be an entertainment. But from the policymakers, it can be an economy. So let's talk about the policy things later. So before I talk about this, I would say that the tourism can be a place where huge investment has been made. And also the North Korea is trying to get the control of the tourism so that they can also make the revenue and make the economy going. However, from the perspective of diversity of the tourism resources, if South Korean people are going to the North as tourists, what can be allowed? We should not be only talking about this free tourism only. The economic development was aimed at in the 1980s in Korea with the tourism opening to the rest of the world. We had examples that we can model after from other countries, and in order to improve the tourism, we could have the special zone for the tourism, and we have special programs for making the tourists as the spenders and for the economic prosperity. So the tourism has two phases. It can create jobs, and it can also have the people spend money in there. So when we talked about the Kumgang Mountain Special Tourism Zone, we wanted to convey our message that we would like to have this message. But in North Korea, they wanted to have the natural resources and the tourism resources that needed the support from the South Korea. They wanted to have the comprehensive package program, including the management of the areas as well. So if we combine everything together in one whole package, that's about a linkage between North and South Korea. So we can have three pillars of tourism. The one is production, the other one is consumption, and also the last one is the life of the people. So we can provide our know-how to North Korea about what we have achieved so far. North Korea wants to have the international recognition as an inbound tourism destination. They can be learning from us. We can tell them our stories and past experiences, and we can exchange our dialogues about what kind of things can be possible. Also, we can have exchanges of ideas, thinking, and habits, and so on. If we naturally have the discussions like that, we can grow the scope of our cooperation in terms of tourism between the two Koreas. Also, we can delve into the life of both residents without infringing upon the actual daily lives, or without being too much touching upon the privacy of each other's people. We can have the mingling together. We might have the tourist spot for walkers, the pedestrians, and we can have the roads going through the villages of North Korea. So many things are possible. Yes, thank you. And there are so many ideas floating about what we can do and how we can do between the two. And one thing I learned today is that we should not regard ourselves as one country divided into two, because we do have totally two different systems. That's one thing you told me today. In this kind of situation, we have a lot of stumbling blocks we have to overcome to reach our goal or destination. How can we naturally solve these problems? Do we have our autonomy to go beyond, like, for example, the sanctions of the UN or some other international regimes? Aren't we having any power or autonomy to do that? Because we are now in a situation, the trust has been gone down between the two Koreas at the moment. But what about this possibility of having the human resources exchanges and the culture exchanges between the two Koreas in the near future? Yes, thank you. And I also had my question to the people in Europe, and I had the question to German people. And Dr. Francois witnessed the crumbling down of the Berlin Wall at the age of 18, he said. And also, I told you that I was feeling a danger of getting into a war in 1993, 1994. That is why I made a film. So Dr. Francois saw the hope out of this situation, and I saw despair in the situation here. We both made films, though. The Berlin Wall going down has the essence of and the meaning of having the history before that, because their exchanges already preceded the Berlin Wall falling down in 1994. There were exchanges of the human beings, there were economic assistance between the West and East Germany. Of course, West Germany helped East Germany, and then people were meeting each other without having the problems at that time. They had preparations, they had readiness to have the united Germany. Only the legal license was achieved after the Berlin Wall crumbling down. Of course, they took a lot of efforts from these people, and also they had to get the approval from neighboring countries like France and other neighboring countries. However, in the Korean Peninsula, we are now witnessing the total blockage of the communications or connections between North and South Korea. Everything is blocked except for some very small amount of the international aid programs. Even that is very limited, right? Yes, it is really very limited. There is no window for the laymen in the South Korea to reach the counterparts in the South Korea. What I wish now is for the government to have more opening and more window of opportunity for the private parties so that we can have more exchanges at the civilian level. Because we are now more matured in terms of our basic life, and also we might have a chance to work together with the North with the COVID-19 as an opportunity. And we have our civil attitude that can regard the other party without prejudice, without bias. But so far, even the word of economic cooperation between North and South Korea was kind of instigating some people in the South. But I wanted to change that with my movie, Still Rain. I talked on and on, saying that individuals do not have the power to change the political system. And the history was given to us without us approving it. And there's nothing for the South and North Korea to do in order to just overcome the situation. There's nothing we can do, and we wanted to do something. That's nonsense. That's a dilemma we have. So if the governments cannot do on the governmental level, they have to empower the civilians to do that. Director Francois is French nationality, but you're also individual. As you are a human being, you have your story to be told to us. So if we are more focused on the human beings and the private level, we might have breakthroughs. Yes, thank you very much. We wanted to talk about tourism, but I didn't want to confine our topics to tourism only. Through many other organizations, we tried to contact with the North after the breakdown of the negotiations. We used KCRC, Korean Council for Reconciliation and Cooperation. We used the Foundation for Inter-Korean Cooperation. We used so many routes to have the message across to the North Korea, but there was no answer. So I was feeling very desperate, not being able to do anything, no matter how much we were trying to do. So I was at a loss. This is my feeling at the moment. Director Francois, you touched upon this a little bit, DMZ. You mentioned DMZ. The DMZ is also a dividing line in Korea, but we do not believe that people across the DMZ on the other side will not be that different from the people here on this side. We have some kind of opportunities to work together. For example, the film festival, so that we can make the record of it. We can leave our memory onto the culture and history. So you can go into DMZ as non-Korean residents. So do you have an intention to make the record of what DMZ is about and what DMZ has to do? If you do that, can you accept it? So do you want to leave some records for us after visiting DMZ?
I'd be happy to leave any kind of things I can do for you in the DMZ, being the south side or the north side. Both are very, very special places. It was funny because I was once filming in 1 year's time on the south side in Panmunjom, and then on the north side in Panmunjom. And although one side was American soldiers and some South Korean soldiers, and on the other side were North Korean soldiers, they were all saying to me, "You're in a very special place. It's very dangerous. Be careful." And I felt, well, it's very dangerous and very special, and it's very similar also. So even at this very special place, you have similarities and heterogeneity, as Director Kim said. No, I think that you raise very important topics altogether in this discussion, and also the possibilities, the hopes, also that one has to be cautious when you get into this kind of process. COVID has stopped it. Maybe COVID could also be a possibility to talk to each other, because it's a problem which is the same in South and North Korea and worldwide. It's something which divides us and unites us. But we have to find ways to overcome it and to talk to each other again. So in Have Fun with Pyongyang, we filmed quite a lot about tourism, and I do agree with that. It's a topic which is very important. It's a topic which is very important for the North Koreans. I mean, we know that the leadership has been paying strong attention about the development in North Korea, about the future development on tourism, and they were very much hoping that especially South Koreans would come again. In Kumgang, in Wonsan, we filmed it empty or full. In one, I especially like very much Wonsan. It's very interesting, very nice people, and very, very good place to go. I hope it will be possible anytime soon. But it was, I think, I had the feeling it was a topic that was of common interest. So to go back, yes, find stories, find people, make films about them. I would love to go again and make other films about daily life or small things, or things that seem to be small. When there's a big politics that we have to deal with, and then there's a small human exchanges we can do on an individual level, as Director Yang said. So I fully agree with him on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Our title for this session is about the K-culture and the peace of the Korean Peninsula and Korean image in the world. So having said that, our discussion so far in this session is the stories from the producers of culture, right? We are directors, we are the policymakers, and so on. And then we have Korean culture wave, which has been very popular all across the world until China was rejecting Korean culture wave with that as an excuse. And also, the BTS is a very influential music group that is almost per se dominating the world now. It has a very powerful resonance all across the world. And many of the countries in Asia are trying to learn Korean language in order to be a migrant worker in some cases, working in Korea. So we have a lot of other countries who are interested in the Korean language and Korean culture and so on. So BTS is one of the factors to make the Korean known to the rest of the world. Inter-Korean relationships is also important. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, we can go beyond the inter-Korean relations for the future generations. How can they do? Where can they go? What is your vision to be telling to our younger generations in the whole world? Yes, thank you. And you mentioned young generation and K-pop or K-culture and Korean culture wave. All these are interconnected in a very complex manner. If I may, I can say that something called K-culture wave, incorporating the soap opera, the TV series, music, film, and so on, were actually booming up in the scene of China. Then later they spread to the rest of the Asian countries, ASEAN countries, then also the rest of the world, as you know. And as you all know very well, our TV series will tell you a lot of messages, and also Mr. Yang's films show you a lot of things about North Korea. And we learned, and we were surprised to hear that North Korean children are listening to K-pop, and they are learning Korean culture. So we have this irony that we didn't know that people next door were actually listening to us. We never thought of that. We only thought the North Koreans are just total strangers. They will not be interested in us. So my message to the younger generation is that the films, music, as part of culture, including TV series, they should have something in common, something that they can share with North Koreans as well. So I see more and more positive atmosphere where South Korean people are harmonizing with North Koreans in terms through this kind of cultural media. So this kind of lower level exchanges will be much more powerful than the programs to be done by the ministry or by the government. So if we are pleasantly knowing that North Korean people are really accepting our culture, that is a big happy surprise. And we can let North Korean people know of our TV series like the Crash Landing on You and many others. There can be some opportunities for us to have better relationships. And there are some things that are not known to the South Korean people either. Using artists, using culture means we can have more opportunities to work together by increasing the scope of the cooperation between the two Koreas. So they should start from the bottom and rise up to the top rather than top-down system. So rather than having the ministries to have the support programs to the working level, it's better for us to have the bottom-up approaches. And also my recent experiences tell me that I had a survey for the last several years, on a period of several years, we learned that the concept or notion of the young people became more liberal than ever before. And at the same time, they do not want to participate in the real life in a fixed manner. The old generations want to see the world as fixed and as the way they want to see. However, the future generations or younger generations have very big flexibility in their mindset. So the rationale that we have to be reunited is something like that. It's very foreign to our younger generations. They feel very strange to that. And also that was evidenced by the fact that the younger generations in Korea did not welcome the delegations from North Korea as a cheerer, as the part of the groups to the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. We thought that they would welcome all these entertainers from the north, but our younger generations did not welcome them because they felt very estranged from those from the north.
And so Director Yang films, commercial films, so it's catering to popular culture. And the younger generation, their view and attitude toward North and South, and dialogues about that. Do you feel that it's different for the younger generation? I think I already mentioned this. From The Attorney to Steel Rain 1 and 2, I have been connecting with the younger generations, and I am quite saddened that people think of certain cultural assets to be of one side or the other. And if inter-Korean relations improve, I think we will have to come together. And in that process, instead of thinking of coming together just in terms of the institutions and there should be a lot of exchange. And from the very beginning, we cannot have sudden exchanges of people. There should first be cultural exchanges. And according to what I have heard, in the mid-1990s, when we had better inter-Korean relations, the music and like drama of South Korea. It was viewed in North Korea, and then suddenly they did not allow it. We heard this from North Korean defectors. And so with improved inter-Korean relations, they will have a difficulty in thinking about, they will have to decide on how they will address the issue of cultural exchange. And I think that indirect cultural exchange is very important. So I don't think that cultural policies should have like directions. Culture reflects our lives, and if we can see one another's lives, then we will have to go toward a convergence. And for convergence of the two, I believe that culture can play an important role. And in that sense, culture, what is more advanced, it survives. So we can lead North Korea, and the content that has been developed up till now, it's not easy to overcome the prejudices. And so I'm very grateful for director Francois' documentary films, because it provides a more objective glimpse of North Korea, and it is important to expose each other. And we have a lot of exchanges via SNSs and YouTube, and we hope to see more spreading of cultural content. And I think that people-to-people level exchanges, it's really important these days, and contents and messages go with one another. And if there is natural exchanges, then there will be more convergence. And so our two panelists talked about culture, and that it is about a living thing, and culture defines our lives, and it itself is our existence. If you look up, search via YouTube, you can hear the music of North Korea, actually. But I don't think we listen to North Korean music, because we have this prejudice of looking down on the culture of North Korean culture. So this is my personal thought, though. And Director Jin-Yang Kim, he wrote a book on knowing North Korea appropriately or accurately. And in that book, we realized that we don't really understand North Korea. So North Koreans, it might be only those who are in the privileged class, but although North Korea is a very controlled country, they know about South Korea. They have exposure to South Korean culture. But South Koreans are very limited in their access to North Korea. And if we want to screen a film of DPRK, it's not possible. It's very difficult, and we are trying to screen even when it's in international content, such as Director Francois' content. We have to go through approvals. So this might seem natural, but I don't think that this is in another way natural. So we have to understand North Korea for us to have exchange. And we have to lay the foundation to enable exchange, and to have that, we have to understand one another. There have been preparations for Unification TV and Kim Jin-al TV, and it's been going on for a long time to prepare for this, yet it's not possible yet. And they are trying to broadcast such content, and yet it is not being approved. And so there is this frustration that I feel as a South Korean. We have like 20, 30 channels of online shopping, of shopping channels, home shopping channels, and yet we cannot have these channels broadcasting North Korean content. But don't we need to know one another to understand one another? But this is my personal opinion, and I hope to see something like this happen in the future. And I think we need to come to an end to our session. So the title of our session is very important, and in the 2020 International Symposium on Sustainable Peace on the Korean Peninsula, I would like to thank the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies and the Korean Culture and Information Service for including a culture session on the Sustainable Peace Symposium. So I hope to see culture sessions in such symposiums in the future too. We need to speak about this, and we need to create output, and we need to voice the need for such cultural exchange, because we have to raise issues and ask questions, or else we cannot come to solutions and we cannot get the answers. And so I would like to thank our three panelists. And before we close, one moment, we will like to give an opportunity to all of our panelists to give their last words. And Francois, would you like to make a comment? We saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I was absolutely agreeing with you that indeed there needs to be an exchange, and it's not a one-sided. You said very rightly that I think many North Koreans know a lot about South Korea through all kinds of ways, official and unofficials, and ideally it would be the same in South Korea, but it's not always the case. So there's lots of potentials, and culture, once COVID is overcome, will surely be in that. South Korea is a fascinating country for all over the world. I know that K-pop makes it very popular for French students to learn Korean, for example. We learned so much from Korean filmmakers here worldwide. I think also from political movements. I mean, the democracy movement in South Korea is very interesting. But on the other issues, let's cooperate and do things together so that we learn from each other, and also we learn from the difficulties. If we want to work with North Korea, it's not easy. It takes time. It takes energy. There are lots of issues, from financing to censorship to false expectation of the West or of South Korean broadcasters, everything. So let's work together. And thanks again for having me. I'm delighted that I could be here. And if you are interested in the films, I think they exist on VOD and in Korean cinemas. Enjoy. Make film, not war.
Well, thank you very much, Director Francois, and thank you for the nice remark and warm saying. Have you seen The Still Rain? Have you seen it?
Yes. And
why don't you say a few words to Director Yang? What is your impression? Do you have anything to say to Director Yang after watching Still Rain? It was a very impromptu question.
I'm so impressed by how much you put in two short films. I want to see The Attorney, because I'm interested in this as well, and I haven't seen it yet. And then I'm also, like all viewers, wondering where will be Still Rain 3? I mean, now that you have been locked underwater, the next one will be complicated. Maybe out of space?
Okay. 양석 감독님 강철비 3 만드실 겁니까?
Are you going to make Still Rain 3? Actually, Still Rain 2 was not so much profitable commercially, but I'll do my best.
말씀으로 좀 소위 마무리 좀 해주시고요.
Now, Ms. Director Yang, please. Looking at the inter-Korean relations, we have to start with the history and the back in the modern times. So sometimes it reminds me that the modern history of the Korean Peninsula should be understood as something that is miserable sometimes. That is pathetic because we have our pity on ourselves looking at the history. Sometimes I'm in tears looking at Koreans in the past sometimes after the 1900s. But we are now here today after going through all these turmoils and difficulties. We are still making steps to the future. One thing I would like to say here as a director of Steel Rain is that there's nothing we can do alone. If North and South Korea want to declare that we are going to be reunited, we cannot do that because that requires the whole international community in this system. And if we really want to do something like this, we have to agree that there's nothing as to be gained by other neighboring countries. Look at China, Japan, and the U.S. They will not profit anything by having the two Koreas to be reunited. We should not feel discouraged by that. We should not feel pathetic about that. There is not something we can do as a very small starting point, and we are strategically called as a non-recovered land in the strategic field of the world. Therefore, the division is not something that we are experiencing in daily lives between North and South Korea. It is evidenced. It is an evidence that we are actually one country because this division is not really dividing us. Actually, so if we are talking about the peace regime, I would like to call this peace regime as exchanges. So the peace regime and the exchanges are the synonyms in my mind. So convergence is also another important thing, as I said. So we can go toward the consensus and the convergence. We can be two different countries in the extreme cases. So we don't have to be reunited as one country. If we are two countries, as long as we're getting along and if we are just getting into the right system of the international community, we can just accept that as well. So we don't have to be so much greedy about the future. All we have to do is to take our steps one by one. Having said that, still, if you can go to the North Korea without any approval, what would you like to do there? I don't ask you to live there forever. Well, as a producer of content, we really need a space in North Korea. As a film setting, South Korea has been developed to a T, so there's no place that is left as natural as before. And I have Chinese friends who said that they want to go back to the history, so they want to go to other countries. Some Chinese people want to go to North Korea because that reminds them of the past of China. Because China has been developed throughout the whole country, there's no place to give them a feeling of the old. So they go to North Korea to have the feeling of the old. And even his father is in tears when he's in North Korea. So I want North Korea to be used as a place for filmmaking. I can shoot there. So if there is a right place for me for the old style movie, I can have a shooting there. So I want to be freely navigating North Korea for my job. Yes, and not only that, we see tremendous changes in the North, and also the South Korea is a ICT country. It's very sophisticated. Maybe we can have some opportunities to work with North Korea on the premises of the ICT development. We have other cultural activities like taking pictures or drawing paintings. We have a place in North Korea in our mind that we want to be there, we want to do something there. So that's kind of the desire for many Korean people. So the rest of the time can be given to you. Now enjoy the rest of the time, Mr. Kim. Thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed the whole session very much, and I am given homework as well as a policymaker. For this session, I was able to have the preview of some other materials before coming here. I was able to read some recent trends of the culture exchanges. I'm going to brief you about what I have read. And also, I'd like to give you some remarks about what has been done and what can be done in terms of culture. So I looked into the scopes of the culture. It can be language, visual arts, films, and culture, art, industry, religion, education, and so on. So for the filmmaking, you will understand better. And also it includes the performance as well. So if you look at the recent trend of the performance, I learned that there is something we can do better. So the performance was the part of the exchange programs that the content was too much centered around South Korea, not North Korea. So we have to revert the situation where we wanted to see more of the North Korean performance in the future. And also we are moving toward pure arts field as well, using the K-pop and K-arts and so on. One of the examples of the exchanges between North and South Korea was 2008. Zexkiss, Shinhwa, and other pop star groups were sent to North Korea for making performance, and also the North Korean delegations were visiting South Korea to have the performance. They were willing to open their doors at that time. Prior to that, prior to 2008, they were very shy, and they were not just opening their doors to us, and they just opened their doors wide at that time. So at that time, we were able to see the very bright opportunity. The other thing is the joint collaboration for making performance between North and South Korea. So that's another way of doing this. I mean, with this performance as a momentum, we were able to develop further. On the other hand, we also had the performance as events. Therefore, we didn't have continuity of the programs for a long time. So we had just had one event, and one time off was just it. So we have to change it. We have to make more of a series of the performance and exchanges. Also, we can have a situation where the North Korean movies can be shown in a third-party country. And there has been limited in terms of the scope of the showing of the films. We want to expand our programs for the cooperation in the future about mutual showings. But all these things have to be considering the political changes and political atmosphere in place. That is a regrettable thing. So systematically, of course, the countries and governments are supposed to take the lead. But are we really okay to let the things to the hands of the government only? We have to ask ourselves this question. When we started to have the exchange program starting from 2008, that was early 2020s when we had the booming of the private party exchanges, ironically speaking. The South Korean organization and the North Korean organization were exchanging programs really without too much intervention by the government at that time. And the level of intervention by the government has been heightened afterwards, going through the dark ages of the exchange programs. And then also very recently, I see more tightening of the regulations by the government on these exchange programs. Why is that? I thought that the other way around, because if the time goes on, maybe private parties will be more active. But in actuality, governments were gaining control on the exchange programs. But we are talking about as culture, the sensitivity of the human beings, and just liberal mind of the just private party people. That's about culture. But if culture is in the hands of the government, they will become very strict and they will be limited. This is something regrettable and something we need to change a bit in the future. So the exchange programs at the civilian level have been gone down. Actually, so far, it's a very sad story about the reason why. 1990 until 2000s, we had people who were very active in exchange programs, and those people have retired already by now. But they didn't have their pupils. They didn't left their descendants, and they just stopped the programs with North Korea. They didn't have any connected mutual programs anymore, so there was this connection. We should have the more programs coming from the North Korea, and we should have more and more opportunities to meet together so that we can have more active participation by both sides. So we have to revert the situation. One thing is that I told you that all these things are very event-oriented, so it's one time off. Also, another regrettable thing I see is that the support by the South Korean people is not as high as we need or we expect. Why is that? We have to ask ourselves, why is that we have such a low support by the South Korean people about the culture exchange programs with the North? If we're talking about the future generations, we have to think what we can leave behind for them. And also, if we have our situation here, we should not have our fixed mindset. We should be flexible enough to have something left behind for the next generation. Another problem we are facing is the lack of human resources. We do not have enough people or experts in this arena. We need to have more of the people who can be fostered throughout the program. We might have a kind of training programs, I don't know, but we can have some kind of mechanism or system to increase the pool of the people or talents. So I really want to have those kind of programs. So on behalf of my organization, KCTI, Korea Culture and Tourism Institute, I have one more thing to say. From 1980s, we have been a student of North Korean issues. We suffered a lot. Of course, our sufferings were just up and down depending on what kind of regime we had. But we did not stop. We continued our studies as an ardent student. Over time, we're very happy to see that our studies have been actually accumulated. We now have a very big pool of our studies and information about North Korea. The lesson from me is that you have to continue to work in order to leave the legacy behind you. Thank you very much. And also, many of us here have been working in one or two fields as experts, and we've been in one area of expertise for such a long time. I know that we're all experts, we're all professionals. Whether it's a third-party country or whatever country that might be, if we can meet together, North and South Korean people are meeting together in another country or so, as soon as we meet, we feel very friendly. We feel like lost families. We feel very free to make conversations in one language. So we recognize the differences between us, but at the same time, we can communicate very well. So that's my feeling. So if we continue to our jobs, we can have the necessity of having the exchange programs between North and South Korea feasible and necessary. So this has been it. Now I have spent my whole time. Thank you very much for your participation. Director Francois, goodbye. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Yes, thank you very much. And this session number 4 was about the K-culture and peace, the Korean image, and the world. And we were able to look into what kind of challenges we have to solve in the future in order to make the Korean culture as something standing out in the world, and also the Korean exchanges as something meaningful. This has been session number 4, and the last session, which is number 5, will be starting from 4:30. That will be the round table for foreign correspondence. The topic we're dealing with is covering North Korea and peace in Korea. It will be a very meaningful occasion for us to have our exchange of the ideas. Please come to us. And also, after all the sessions are finished, we're going to have an online quiz event for the lucky draw. If you come to DAUM and enroll for the quiz programs, you can have a lot of opportunities to get the gifts out of it. So thank you very much. I'll see you at 4:30.